I am live. Hello there. We're a little early, but I'm Peter Carlafteses. I'm the co-director of Three Rooms Press, and we will be enjoying ourselves this evening presenting a new book that today is its birthday, or yesterday was actually the birthday, the 28th. Today is the 29th. So this is it, Ray by Ray, a daughter's take on the legend of Nicca Ray by Nicca Ray, who is here with us. I'll let you say hello for a second. Here's Nicca. Hello, Nicca.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming.
All right. So we're still a little early here, 5 minutes. So let me just chew the fat. You want to chew the fat too? Or should we save you for the broadcast? How do you feel?
What?
Do you want to stay
About
on?
what?
Do you want to stay on, or would you like to? We've got 5 minutes till we go actually live.
Okay. Are you gonna chew the fat and entertain them?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
I'll save you. Let's save you for for 8 o'clock when all your fans are going to tune in. Okay.
All right.
All right. So now you're stuck with me. Here's the book again, Ray by Ray, a daughter's take on the legend of Nicca Ray. And if you want to order a copy, all you have to do is see that right there on your screen. Go to threeroomspress.com shop, and Ray by Ray will be right there, and you can order yourself a copy, and we will send it right out to you. There will be no delays. We still have a post office. Let's take advantage of it. So here we got Nicca Ray. Hey, look, I even did it right. And then there's Nicca over on this side when she was a lot younger. And Nicca Ray when kind of early 70s, I would say, when he was teaching upstate here. Or maybe at NYU, I'm not sure. I would say Binghamton, upstate. We'll bring up Nicca very soon. We've got a couple of minutes till we go actually live, 8 o'clock for the broadcast. But it was sure fun to work on this book and get it together. With Nicca and Mary Mann Speaker, our lead editor. And we worked on it since pretty much a year ago now. So it was quite a project, and Nicca has worked on it for years and years before that, probably since the turn of the century. We can say that now, the turn of the century. How does that feel? I don't know about this century. I'm going to bring up my friends and ask them about this century. I don't think any of us know about this century. But one good thing you can always do is read a good book. And this is one of them, Ray by Ray, a daughter's take on the legend of Nicca Ray by Nicca Ray, the daughter of Nicca Ray, the namesake daughter of Nicca Ray. Plus, we have an introduction by Samantha Fuller, who is the namesake daughter of Sam Fuller. Very similar contemporary of Nicca Ray. They were very much in tune with their own work and at a similar time. So how are we doing here? What do we have? Looks like I'm ready to go. So we're gonna get this show started. Let me make sure I have all my notes. I've got that note. I've got that note. I have this. Don't confuse. I have this. I'm ready to go. I have this one. And I've got all of these. So, yeah. All right. So I think we're ready to go, huh? Let's put up this lovely banner. Okay. Hello, how are you? I am going to open the show right now. I am Peter Carlafteses, co-director of Three Rooms Press. My illustrious partner and companion for life, Cat Georges, is in the other room running the technical side of this. And I am right here before you with the book we will present tonight, Ray by Ray, a daughter's take on the legend of Nicca Ray. And it's a memoir by Nicca Ray, who is the namesake daughter of Nicca Ray. And we're going to bring her up right now. Here comes Nicca, and there she is. Say hello, Nicca.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the launch of Ray by Ray. I'm so happy to be here and to celebrate with all of you.
That's right.
Hi.
Our birthday was yesterday, and today it's 1 day old, the book. So it's very exciting birthday for the book. And we're so happy to have you here with us. You've spent a long time on this book, I know, putting it together, researching a lot of. It's been a part of your life for the past since 2000, about right?
About, yeah, it was close to 20 years. Yep, that I worked on this.
And myself and our lead editor, Mary Manspeaker, we've been working with you for about a year, getting this all together last year.
Yes.
We started all through the summer and had a wonderful time getting it to be the book you wanted it to be. And it was a lot of fun for us to do that. It was a very gratifying experience for us to be in this position, to be able to achieve this. So I just wanted to say that this is the book, and if you see there right below this little deal right here is where am I? You can't do it. Anyhow, Ray by Ray is the book, and you can get yourself a copy right there at the bottom. Order Ray by Ray directly from Three Rooms Press at threeroomspress.com shop. So please, or while we're talking here, we also have Chris D with us. He'll be coming along in a minute after we talk with Nicca a little bit about her father and her life. First of all, Library Journal said about the book, in this intimate blend of memoir and biography, Nicholas Ray's daughter, Nicca, a filmmaker and writer, explores her father's complex life and artistic legacy. So, as well as their own complicated relationship and his impact on her life. So that's what we're doing. She did here. I think it's a very crowning achievement that she accomplished with the book. Her father is, Vincent Canby, when he passed away in 1979, was it? When he passed away, 79, said that he was an original filmmaker who worked imaginatively within a conventional format, Hollywood. So he always had an imaginative take on where he was and an original take. And that's not an easy thing, especially when you're grinding out within the system day by day. That's just not what made him who he was. He wasn't that type, and he never was going to be. And he proved it, in life, as a director. And then again, Jean-Luc Godard said that Nicholas Ray is cinema, right? So, what's your favorite film of your dad's?
My favorite is The Lusty Man.
The Lusty Man,
yep.
Robert Mitchum.
With Robert Mitchum, Susan Hayward, and Arthur Kennedy.
And that's the rodeo one, right? About 1952, I think.
Sure.
Maybe 53. I think.
Yeah, and it's 52, I believe.
Yeah, 52.
And it was about Robert Mitchum is a ex-rodeo star who's trying to figure out where his place in the world is, and he goes and he goes back to his childhood home, and he meets this couple, Susan Hayward and Arthur Kennedy, and Arthur Kennedy wants to be the rodeo star, and Robert Mitchum grooms him.
Right. But his first film was They Live by Night, which was made in 1947, but it had a couple of years on the shelf because of Howard Hawks, or not Howard Hughes had bought RKO, and it took him 2 years to complete that transaction. So it sat there on the shelf, but what an impressive debut that was. Took that novel, Thieves Like Us was the novel, and I think they paid like $500 to the guy for the rights. His name was Edward Anderson, I think, was the writer, and he wrote it in 1937, but it wasn't made until 47, nor screened till 49. So, and your daddy started out. What an amazing man to have started out with Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, come on, he said, I got to get out of this Wisconsin, right?
Right. Well, even before that, he had gone to he had gone to the University of Chicago as a non-matriculating student, and there he met Thornton Wilder, and then he went to New York because he thought that he wanted to be involved in the theater, and this was, I think, 1931, 32. And then Frank Lloyd Wright offered him an apprenticeship at Taliesin. So yes, he was with Frank Lloyd Wright for a little bit, not for the whole time of the apprenticeship. But yeah, he wanted out of Wisconsin. He knew that he wanted something in the arts. He had done some radio when he was in Wisconsin. His sister worked at the local radio station, and there he produced or directed one of George Bernard Shaw plays, and that got him attention and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, he ended up with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Right. And then he moved on to working with Alan Lomax. I mean, this is the, mid 20th century. This is the, from the Great Depression on, the great minds of the time are the incredible, traveling around in the dark on dirt roads, recording the music of the misbegotten. Yeah. What a place to wind up after being with Frank Lloyd Wright.
Right. Well, he had, after Frank Lloyd Wright, he went back to New York, and he was involved in the leftist theater on the Lower East Side, and he was a member of a group called the Theater of Action. And then this is all when the WPA started, and he started working for the WPA, and he and his first wife, Jean Evans, they went across the United States, bringing theater to the most rural communities and the most hardest hit by the dust storm and the Great Depression. And they believed that theater could be the voice of the people. And they started to record stories before he even met Alan Lomax. And then when he met Alan Lomax in Washington, D.C., they shared their love of finding out about America, what makes America tick, who is America, what is the voice of America.
Right, and they went around. They had that show a little later on, Back Where I Come From, which featured Woody Guthrie, Lead Belly. They found in Angola prison and got his release. Pete Seeger, these great folk singers that became a part of his soundtracks too. A lot of that became later on, integrated into his soundtracks of his films. So, what a life!
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think we should get our next guest up, Chris D. Let's bring Chris up for a minute, okay? And introduce him. Is that okay, Nicca? If I bring up Chris?
That's totally okay.
All right. I'm gonna
hello, Chris.
For a second, introduce him, and then I'll get you two guys going. I'll have all three of us for a second. Then I'll leave you two guys at it, okay? All right. Here comes Chris D. from he's from Los Angeles right now. Look at him. He looks like he's from Los Angeles. Good to see you, Chris D. He's a punk poet, a punk singer with the Flesh Eaters, Divine Horsemen, and has done so many things. You've got the Yakuza book. You've been archiving a film with the Cinematheque out there, the Egyptian Theater. You just have your hands in so many pies, and especially belong here with us on this particular launch being so in tune with the films of Nicholas Ray, and having a punk writer of Nicca, who's quite a follower of your band back in the day.
Yeah, I'm gratified that Nicca asked me to do this, and I love her dad's films. I think I've seen virtually all of them, and many of them multiple times. I mean, there's some of my favorites, like They Live by Night and Lonely Place, The Lusty Man, which she mentioned, Rebel Without a Cause, of course, On Dangerous Ground. One that I know she doesn't like, Bitter Victory, which is one of my favorites. But
I'll let you two get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into a discussion on that. But yeah, since really I was very young. I mean, I certainly saw Rebel Without a Cause when I was in high school. I'm sure I saw it on television, and then I went to film school at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, starting in 1970, the fall of 1970. And I was a film major with emphasis in screenwriting. And I was a big follower of Nicholas Ray and Sam Fuller and Joseph Losey, those kind of directors. And of course, Joseph Losey came from around the same area in Wisconsin that Nicholas Ray did. And there's, many other directors from that period. And we'll get into some of the unique genre crossovers that not only Nick did, but some of his contemporaries that he ended up knowing and was friendly with. I think that's kind of illuminating of the time period and how genres were used, not only to give a catharsis to audiences, but to get across political ideas without being pretentious or without being dogmatic or getting into things that frankly could get them into trouble with certain right-wing elements in the government. So,
of course, at that time it was McCarthy era, the House Un-American Committee that was like pretty much running the industry when all of those three directors you mentioned came to be and careers began to burgeon. So that is something that you need to thread the needle with. I'm going to bring Nicca up with us and then let you guys do some talking. But first, let me say, please see the banner there, Ray by Ray, A Daughter's Take on the Legend of Nicholas Ray, by Nicca Ray, who we have here with us today. And also we have a nice blurb by Peter Trachtenberg, who said, Nicholas Ray invented the meme of teenage anguish. His daughter Nicca lived it. The first miracle is that she survived. The second is that she created this beautiful, heartbreaking book. It's just, it's a wonderful book, and I think you should get a copy of it. So let's bring up Nicca. Hold on a second there, Chris. Hi, Nicca. You're back. We're going to bring up Chris with you now. Maybe have a little chat.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay? I've been having a little day.
And if anybody wants to make any comments, please do. Let's hear your comments. Let's see if there are 42 comments. I've got plenty of them. A lot of people here. I love them. All right, so good. So let me take this banner off, and I always get a big laugh out of Nicca, which I want to do right now because not in a lonely place. Knock on any door. I go knock on any door, and you find a Nick Romano. So I get to do my Bogart for her. She's laughing. So let's bring
I'm easy.
I know. Let's bring up Chris, and we'll have a little chat about a little bit, maybe about. I found this interesting fact here, which I thought was great. That he directed Duke Ellington. It's the only time he directed a Broadway play. Was called Beggar's Holiday, right? And it was Duke Ellington's only book play. Of course, there were Sophisticated Ladies later on and all of that. The only book play, it was 1947, and it was Zero Mostel made his debut in this play, and it also had every night there was a picket outside because it had an interracial relationship in it. So Beggar's Holiday was playing in 1947, directed by Nicca Ray, and written by, the music was written by Duke Ellington, his only play, and starring Zero Mostel. What a moment in time, huh? 1947, when he had made They Live by Night, and it was sitting on the shelf. I guess he made it over there to do this play. I thought that was just a lovely thing to know, which I didn't know before today. So, so we all love They Live by, In a Lonely Place, right? I think that's one of the great noirs of all time. I think most noir lovers put that one in the top 10 wherever you see. What do you think about that, Chris?
Oh, In a Lonely Place. I was just going to say, that movie was in constant revival when there were still a lot of revival cinemas in at least the Los Angeles area. I mean, there used to be before VHS video came to be a popular way of watching movies that you hadn't seen in years and years. There were the only way you could do it was if you saw them on the big screen. And something that I did when I was still at film school was I had screenings of movies like Out of the Past and Nick's On Dangerous Ground and Anthony Mann's Raw Deal. I was a big noir fan, but I remember there were so many revival theaters in LA in the late 70s still. And I remember going with John Doe from X to see In a Lonely Place at a theater. It was on Melrose. It was right around Wilton and Melrose. I don't remember the name of it. I think it's it's an ethnic bakery now in that area. But that was the first time I think John had seen it, and it was one of his favorites. And it was great seeing all those movies at that time on the big screen because a lot of them were being revived, and there were places even then at LACMA and some of the other UCLA Film Archive that were having screenings even back then, and you could see some of those movies on the big screen before video. But In a Lonely Place is certainly one of the strongest ones, and it really enabled Nick to showcase a lot of issues about how men relate to women, and especially men that are creative men and are outsiders themselves and have anger issues like frustrations about their career.
Like the character Dix, like the character in A Lonely Place, Dix, Bogey's character. Sure. I was born when she kissed me. I died when she left me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me, right? There's so that's the written part, but that was written by the book was written by Dorothy B. Hughes, who created this. She was a great noir writer of the time, pretty much unheralded at the time. But she, the original script, the original novel had the character was a real slime. He wasn't even a screenwriter. He had nothing to do with Hollywood. He was just mooching off his relatives, telling him he's a screenwriter.
Right, and he was basically a serial killer in the book.
Killer. Yeah. And the funny thing that 10 years did for Bogey is that 10 years earlier, had they made this, he would have been the serial killer, you know, and he would have, you know, gone and played another serial killer in the next film. But this one, yeah, years later, but it's still a great noir. Nicca, what do you think of In a Lonely Place?
In a Lonely Place?
Yeah.
I think it's a masterpiece.
It is.
I think it is his masterpiece. You know, he when he first met Gavin Lambert, he told Gavin Lambert, the writer, that Dick Steele was like him. You know, he didn't. So I think my father had the same kind of angst and anger and feelings of alienation as Dick Steele had, especially in Hollywood. And you know, I talked to Curtis Hanson about my father's films a few years before he passed away, and he was, because Curtis Hanson used In a Lonely Place as like a model to show the actors that he used in LA Confidential, to show them what Hollywood was like at the time that LA Confidential was taking place. And Curtis, I was going through my papers today and I found this great quote from Curtis. And he had said to me, Nick's movies deal with characters who are very emotional and battling demons. They also exist in a society that is wanting them to conform to that society. And they are either alone dealing with this, or they are bonding with somebody and dealing with a love story. And that just makes me think about David Thompson, who I interviewed, saying that, you know, Nick wasn't like anybody in Hollywood. He just wasn't one of them. And so he was suspect. And just like In a Lonely Place, Dick Steele isn't one of them. You know, he's not making popcorn movies. And I talk about that a little bit in Ray by Ray. I write about, you know, meeting Curtis Hanson and what, you know, what his take on In a Lonely Place was in terms of making movies in Hollywood. So that's a long answer to your question.
Okay.
I love In a Lonely
There's
Place.
long answers. Before I turn you two over to the punk era, we want to talk a little bit about punks, and we'll come back and 1980, late 70s, early 80s, Los Angeles, which you two are very familiar with. I want to say, if you please, Ray by Ray, a daughter's taken. Here's the daughter right there. On the legend of Nicholas Ray, and that's Nicca Ray right there. That's Chris D, and they were both punks in L.A. too. So I'm gonna let them reminisce a little while about that day, which is also in the book. So I'm gonna back out for a minute and let you guys do some punk reminiscing. Okay. So enjoy your time, and I'll be back shortly. So enjoy yourself, and
Okay.
we all look forward to hearing you. All those days. The more drugs, the better, I guess, until you cleaned up, right? Both of you. So, bye-bye. Whoops.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Hi. Hey, Nicca. So where shall we start? I just am so surprised that I've told you many times that we didn't meet until about 10 years ago. We didn't meet when we were actually going to the same clubs and seeing a lot of the same bands and actually having a lot of the mutual friends. So that was amazing to me that you know, when I found out you'd been around during that whole early, you know, late 70s, early 80s period. And
Yeah.
anyway, you're around the Cafe de Grand, which is one of the clubs that the bands played at in Hollywood.
Yep. The Vex, Cafe de Grand, Starwood, Godzilla's, all those Godzillas. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think like that I always felt like you guys were like the grown-ups, or like I think that I was very shy, even though like I was a really like crazy drunk. And when I once asked a friend what I was like when I was drunk, and he said, well, if you weren't passed out in the corner of a club, you were yelling at people. So, I remember so many times going to the Starwood and, going upstairs to go backstage, because for a while I was going out with the bass player of the Gears, Reds, and I would go upstairs to go backstage to meet up with Reds, and they wouldn't let me back there because I'd been such an asshole the night before. But then I would sweet talk my way into getting backstage. But I don't know what got me. So anyway, so when like you guys were just, I was just shy and kind of intimidated. Like I felt like, oh, I didn't belong. So even if you had been in the same room as me, or I'd been backstage, I wouldn't have necessarily gone up to you and said hi,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I was using alcohol for the same reason, and because I was very shy and reserved if I didn't have a few drinks in me, and I was no stranger to hard liquor, and I was pretty good at holding my liquor, unlike a lot of other people I knew. But I still did a lot of stuff drunk that I wouldn't have done if I had been under the influence, and nothing particularly egregious, but just some kind of unwise choices. I certainly drove around a lot in my car in Hollywood, drunk, which never a good thing to do, as I'm sure all our viewers know. So,
but you used to go to the Mask, right? I never went to the Mask, but you were like a Mask person.
Yeah, I started going to the Mask in mid 1977 when I was actually still with my first wife, Bonnie, and I had already met people like John and Exene when they were at Beyond Baroque, and at the poetry workshop there, the Venice Poetry Workshop, and I had actually met both those guys separately from each other right before they became a couple, and right before they, put the X band together. And then when I saw him at the Mask, I went up and, oh, hey, I've met you guys at Beyond Baroque and the poetry workshop, and we kind of bonded over that. And we had a lot of literary influences that were in common that a lot of the other bands didn't necessarily have. Not to diss any of the other bands, but also it just they were into movies. And I remember my girlfriend, after my wife and I had split up, Judith, she and I and John and Exene would go out to a lot of those revival movie theaters, and John and I would go out on our own, boys' night out or whatever, and see some movies. And a Lonely Place was definitely one I remember. But the whole punk scene, I think, was made up of so many people that were artists and musicians and filmmakers who were trying to find their place. And there certainly was. You can draw a corollary from that to back in the time when your dad was probably first in Hollywood, and the kind of people he was hanging out with. I mean, he was always into bohemian kind of a crowd before, before the Beat Generation. In fact, I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask you, Peter, bringing up Alan Lomax and some of the recordings your dad did with Alan Lomax, traveling around the country, people like Leadbelly and other blues and folk singers. There was a guy, I watched Wind in the Everglades because it was on a few nights ago on Turner Classic Movies. And there's a great guy, African American guy, who's playing piano in the bordello, and Christopher Plummer, the lead character, is getting drunk and kind of hanging on the piano and singing along with the black singer guy, and the African American singer guy has got this great kind of conk hairdo, but he's got the movie takes place, I don't know, around the turn of the 19th
The turn of the
century.
century.
Yeah, and it's set in Miami when Miami was just a little backwater beach town, and so there's that great kind of honky tonk sequence in the whorehouse with that singer, and the guy was quite good, and I was wondering if you if you remember what I'm talking about, if you remember anybody that might know who that guy was, or.
I don't know who that guy was, but I know what you're talking about. And that movie was set in the Florida Everglades during the turn of the 20th century when plumes, feathers for women's hats were very, very popular. So the poachers would come and kill these rare birds. Anyway, so no, I only remember Burl Ives from
Yeah.
that movie, and Burl Ives actually gave my oldest half brother Tony a guitar, and Leadbelly used to babysit Tony when Leadbelly lived in the Lower East Side, and Tony lived with his mom Jean in like off Houston and Varick, around that area. But no, I don't remember. I liked that movie, Wind Across the Everglades. Did you like it?
Yeah, I like it a lot. I think that you can tell that once you know the backstory that that Nick was indulging a bit, but shall we say, behind the scenes, and Bud Schulberg was a little unhappy with the schedule, and Bud Schulberg came in and did some of the scenes later and reshot some stuff and had some arguments with your dad, and there's some scenes in the movie that seem a little too pat as far as really pushing the conservation things. Not that your dad was against that, but he just was your dad was a little more subtle about stuff like that than Bud Schulberg was.
Right. Well, behind the scenes on that movie, it was just a disaster. I mean, we actually interviewed Bud Schulberg, and my dad was not in the best of shape making that movie, and so he got kicked off the set basically, and so they had to pick it up and kind of make it work somehow. So it does have this kind of I remember Wim Wenders said that he loved the movie because it was like anarchy. It was just, and it's just kind of like all over the place, which which brings me back to like, punk rock, and when you mentioned like going to see movies with John Doe, like X was one of the first bands I saw. It was actually the first punk band I ever saw was the Bags, and I was hooked. And then it was 999, and then the Bags, and then X, and both Alicia Velasquez and Exene Cervenka showed me that girls didn't have to be nice and pretty and well behaved, and were allowed to be angry. And I was so angry. My dad had just died. I was just like at a loss. And those, like, I talk about you and your, that whole group of people, you guys were like my elders. And oh, I found my people. I'm okay to be just the way that I am for right now. And even if it was really messy. And like my dad, so that brings me back to my dad. You know, he was unapologetic for his messiness in a way,
Yeah.
which it is really kind of great. You know, he was who he was. And you know, and then bring back to, like, you were talking about Hollywood at the time my dad was there and hanging out with the bohemians and stuff. Well, when he was working in the theater on the Lower East Side, that was really reminded me of punk rock, because like people slept, like his theater group, they all slept in the same loft. They shared a living space. They went out into the streets and they performed street theater, you know, and it was just like bare bones. And that reminds me of, like, you know, when you really adopted that punk rock lifestyle, like back in the day, like if you like look the way we did, it wasn't easy to get a job. You know, and like you know, it was, I just really, like, always really admired my father for being a nonconformist, you know. And I think he paid an awful price for it. But you know, like going back to Wind Across the Everglades, I mean, he was really a mess. And had he been in a sober state of mind, I think that he would have loved making that movie, because it was like similar to going into the back roads of America, when he was recording the stories of people who lived in shacks, who didn't have bathrooms, you know, and bringing those stories and making those stories into plays and bringing them to festivals and to the White House lawn and stuff. And he would have really loved to have made that movie, but he was just wasted, you know.
Yeah.
And you know.
Hello, everybody. Chris, I found out your pianist was named, he was named Beecham, Rufus Beecham, born 1910 in Vidalia, Georgia. And he was a pianist, and that was his only film credit. So I don't know if we can take it from there, but that was his name. So,
well, I can't imagine that that anybody but your dad, Nicca, was the one to cast him, because it seems so. That was one of the most Nicca Ray scenes in the movie, and also all the stuff with Burl Ives and Christopher Plummer in the swamp, where they're at. Burl Ives is a character called Cottonmouth, who's the head of all the plume poachers, and they have a drinking contest with the jug. And there's the people in the cast that are like Cottonmouth's gang are Peter Falk, Emmett Kelly, who was a famous clown, really didn't have a lot of film credit, but he is great in the movie. Peter Falk is great in the movie. Several other character actors that made up the gang. It was really fascinating.
Gypsy Rose Lee is in the movie.
Gypsy Rose Lee is in the movie.
Oh yeah.
The head of the cat house, and there was so much of that stuff. You could really tell when the scenes that your dad had the most influence in, and the ones that were more maybe Bud Schulberg. But all the cinematography in that movie is pretty amazing, and the nature stuff and the stuff where they're actually, it looks like the actors are actually in the Everglades slogging through the swamps or taking their pole boats through the swamps. And some of the characters, the one thing I wanted to bring up before I forget is your dad seems like he has some relationship uh, uh, things in some of his movies between some of the male actors who come into conflict, and they end up forming kind of an understanding or either an uneasy friendship or a bond where they, by the end of the movie, they may not have started out understanding each other, but they've come to some kind of understanding. And Burl Ives and Christopher Plummer's character when across the Everglades. I'm thinking Robert Ryan and Ward Bond in On Dangerous Ground. Um, there's several others. I mean, there's Anthony Quinn and Peter O'Toole in The Savage Innocence, which too many people have not seen.
And it's a beautiful film. I love The Savage Innocence.
Yeah. And it's such a shame that Peter O'Toole's voice got redubbed by someone else, but I guess that's
that's Hollywood, right? Even
that's
though
Hollywood. That was before. That was right before Peter O'Toole made Lawrence of Arabia. If it had been after that, he wouldn't have gotten his voice redubbed. But
right. But that duality of the characters, like I think, like on Dangerous Ground, which I think is totally underrated. It's such a beautiful film, and I wish more people knew about it. But Jim Ryan, for those of you who don't know, is this city cop who's got a violent streak that he cannot control, and he is sent to a city in the mountains to help catch the killer of a girl. And Ward Bond he's the sheriff there, right?
he's actually the victim's father. The sheriff is kind of an
the victim.
Yeah.
Right.
But Ward Bond really he wants to blow the guy away as soon as he finds him. And Robert Ryan.
So they become so Ward Bond becomes the Robert Ryan character. Like Robert Ryan brings the violence with him to this mountain town, but then he finds love and Ward. What?
I was just going to say, Robert Ryan's put in the position of having to be the rational one, and be a placating presence, and kind of trying to figure out psychological ways of calming Ward Bond down so he doesn't murder this guy as soon as they catch him. And then, of course, there's, we won't. I tend to talk about movies so enthusiastically that I'll start giving people spoilers, so we won't say what happens to the killer. But there's that duality, that kind of mirroring of characters, and how both the characters learn more about themselves through interacting with each other, which I think is a really, really important. It's a really important thing in your dad's movies, and it gives people who watch the movies, maybe not consciously, but it's kind of comforting. It's a way of like your dad was showing how important interacting with people that aren't always the same as us. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference, and people are too rigid and they stay the same, and but other people come together and they may have differing viewpoints, and by interacting with each other, they come to some kind of a understanding of each other, which is a really important thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I have to
What?
say, I have to say, you're tearing me apart because we got to move on. You're tearing me apart. We have to move on to Rebel. We can't leave out Rebel with a Cause, one of the most iconic films of all time, changed the course of Hollywood history by leading everything toward the youth, which was important to find out there was a youth and an angst in youth that needed to be addressed and dealt with. So what do you think about Rebel Without a Cause in the scheme of things, Nicca?
Well, this was a really hard film for me because it was always present. So it made it really hard for my father to go away because Rebel Without a Cause is always there. And so I didn't see it till I was about 34, 35. I think I was 35, and I saw it at the Museum of Modern Art. And it was a rainy night, and I thought me and Jesse would be the only people in the auditorium, but I was so wrong. It was packed. People were sitting in the aisles, and I felt such pride in my father on that evening. And it was such a beautiful film, such a beautiful film. I often think about the scene when James Dean, Natalie Wood, and Sal Mineo are in the house and they're like playing family, and how, growing up, my friends were my family. And especially like when I moved out and I, lived in houses with a lot of other punk rockers, and we formed our own family, because most of us came from these kind of fucked up families. And I just think the more I think about Rebel Without a Cause, and the more I'm open to looking at it, the more of a masterpiece I acknowledge it is. And there's a reason why it's still attracting a lot of viewers and a lot of attention. What, 60, how many years ago was it made?
65 years ago. And
65 years.
It touched so many people then.
Imagine. What?
I said it touched so many people then. In the moment that it came out, it was just like what we would call, a blockbuster now, but it was just set the youth. There was the Blackboard Jungle, there was the Wild One, but you were in school, you were stuck in a classroom, or you had motorcycles. Here, this was just, this was the first.
Right, it could have family. It didn't, my dad didn't want to make a movie about juvenile delinquency that from the wrong side of the tracks. He'd already made Knock on Any Door. I think that he was a bit of a delinquent when he was in high school. His family sure wasn't, apple pie and milk kind of family. They were kind of fucked up too, which I write about. And so he needed to form relationships too. And certainly, like, I think he felt like a real kinship with the actors I know he felt a real kinship with the actors in Rebel Without a Cause. And I think that shows through in the movie. This tight, they were all very tight, and of course his relationship with James Dean, which I don't think he ever had a relationship like that with anyone else in his life. But Yeah, you know, it was a really special movie that everyone wanted to be a part of. Natalie Wood fought to be cast in that movie. You know, people heard about it, they wanted to be a part of it. What do you guys think of the movie?
You know, it's a movie for me that from the time I first saw it, I was probably still in high school, and it was on TV occasionally, and because I know I saw it before I was in college, and I started college in 1970, so I'm sure I saw it at least once or twice on TV, and I might have even seen On Dangerous Ground before I went to college. But that's what's so great about television before the age of cable. I mean, there were a lot of commercials, but there were a lot of movies on television, a lot of older movies from the
Yeah.
30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and they were on all the channels. I mean, from the network channels, the networks would have their their mainstream network shows that broadcast all over the country between around 5 or 6 in the evening and 11 at night, and then all the rest of the time, quite often, even those network channels were showing movies. They weren't, they might have a few game shows, but there was the afternoon movie on 3 or 4 LA channels. There were morning movies on a couple channels. There was the Late Show. I know Channel 11, which is owned by the horrible Fox people now, but KTTV, they had movies literally from 8 at night until 6 or 7 in the morning. So there, and Channel 5 had KTLA had all these movies. So you got to see really a lot of old movies all the time. I saw several of your dad's movies before I really got a handle on who he was. But he was one of those guys that I kind of picked up on early. And him and Sam Fuller, especially, they were two that I really noticed. And by the time when I was in college, I got Andrew Sarris's American Cinema book, which had all the directors, and they had them in the different chapters. And looking back on Andrew Sarris's book now, I think a lot of his takes on some of the directors, especially the ones he wasn't real fond of, are kind of mean spirited, unnecessarily so. But he liked your dad. He liked Sam Fuller, and he liked Joseph Losey, and trying to think of some of the other ones. That was Jacques Tourneur, who directed Out of the Past. People like that. Certainly, some of the more famous ones like Howard Hawks and those kind of mavericks who actually did really well in the Hollywood system. Anyway, but yeah, I love Rebel Without a Cause. Just the iconography. Once you see it in color, especially, and if you get to see it on the big screen, yeah, and that's one thing I think. I don't know how much your father really planned that out, but it really seems to me he must have been very conscious of color schemes in his color films, especially like we haven't talked about Johnny Guitar with Joan Crawford and Sterling Hayden, which is just one of the most amazing colored movies ever. And the color schemes in that movie, it's so surrealist, and it's operating within this kind of genre story, but you have the male characters, the alpha male characters, really surpassed by the two alpha female characters, Joan Crawford and Mercedes McCambridge, who hate each other's guts and are trying to destroy each other.
And in real life. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm kind of going on too long here, but
the colors and Bigger Than Life. That red couch and Bigger Than Life.
Yeah, Bigger Than Life is another one that's got so many color-coded things. That's one thing I really like. Hitchcock really did that a lot too, and played with colors, especially in his movies in the 50s. But I really see that in your dad's movies, the color movies he made. And, you know, of course, his black and white ones are some of my favorite. You know, we haven't talked about Bitter Victory yet. Should we even get into that? I don't know.
Leave you guys alone for that one.
How much time do we have left? I see we're coming up on an hour.
We own this station, so you know, we own it. This is our station.
We can go on as long as we.
I don't know that you guys want to put on the gloves for Bitter Victory. I don't know if I should let that. Let me let me say real quick about our book here, Ray by Nicca Ray, who's right here. That's her. Nicca Ray wrote this book, and we published it, and we're very proud of it, and I know she is, and you should have a copy. So please order one from us here. And you guys really want to go for Bitter Victory, or?
It's up to Nicca.
It's up to you. I mean, you know, I did watch a little clip on it on YouTube. You know, in the desert when he's got to kill the soldiers.
Yeah.
And you know, it made me think, well, maybe I should get it, you know, give this movie another chance. But, you know, when I did see it, it was like nails on a chalkboard to me.
I can see.
But I want to hear
what you're not in the right frame of mind when you see it. Well, there's that the for people who haven't seen it, it's set in North Africa during World War II, and Richard Burton plays a captain, I think, and Kurt Jurgens, who they explain his German accent being that he's from South Africa. That's why he has a German accent. But he's married to an old sweetheart of Richard Burton, played by Ruth Roman. And Ruth Roman and Richard Burton haven't seen each other since Richard Burton stood her up on their last date in London. And they run into each other, and it's like the flame is reignited. And Kurt Jurgens doesn't know that they knew each other before. And Kurt Jurgens ends up being Richard Burton's commanding officer when they go on this secret mission in the desert to capture all these Nazi documents, and they have to bring them back to headquarters. And after they do that, on their way back, the catastrophe strikes and they lose their vehicles. They have to go on foot. And there's this antagonism between Kurt Jurgens' character knowing intuitively something has gone on between his wife, Ruth Roman, and Richard Burton. And Richard Burton has got such a he's got a very Nick Cage kind of character. Nicholas Ray kind of character. He's kind of very intelligent. He's very sarcastic, and he's really well educated. He knows all this history, North African history, and he's also an archaeologist when he's not in the military. So that was why he was there in North Africa, and Ruth Roman was working with him before she enlisted in the military. So, and she's I can't remember what her rank is, but after they had become estranged, she gave up on him and married Kurt Jurgens, who's definitely not somebody who's the love of her life. So there's that tension between Richard Burton and Kurt Jurgens as they slog through the desert to survive. And the other thing I like about the movie is that you've got all these amazing actors that are the other soldiers. Christopher Lee is one of the supporting actors. Nigel Green, who maybe a lot of people don't recognize. He was in the Ipcris File with Michael Caine and quite a few other movies in the 60s. he's got a very crazy role as a insubordinate soldier who was a safecracker and a kind of a sociopathic criminal before he got in the military. So there's all these interesting characters around them, and they're all kind of watching because they all know there's this thing about ready to explode between Richard Burton and Kurt Jurgens, and it keeps getting more pronounced as they go along in the desert. And I don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but the way it's resolved is really heartbreaking. And Ruth Roman's character at the end is really devastated. And it's just one of the movies that really emotionally gets to me. It's like On Dangerous Ground for me. It really tears my guts out when I see the movie. So, but anyway, I just wanted to plead my case because I know you're not a fan of the movie.
No, but now I want to see it. Now I want to see it again.
It's like
maybe it's like you said, if you're in a certain frame of mind, you certain things, you don't respond to.
Yeah, you get impatient with the pace of the film, or and I don't know which version you saw. Yeah, because it got restored about.
I don't know which
version. It got restored about 15 years ago, and before that, it had about 20 minutes cut out of it by Columbia here in the United States. In Europe, it was the full version, but in America, it got cut pretty drastically. So.
Okay. Well, I'll have to give another shot, because, you like it. And Jean-Luc Godard actually said my dad was cinema after, he loved that movie. So,
There's a little Nicca Ray humanity going on here where Chris was, liked the movie and you didn't, and all of a sudden he's won you over, So maybe by the end of it, you won't like it anymore.
We're playing out character dynamics from a Nicca Ray film.
We do have the book here. Here's a nice review from or a blurb by Amos Poe. Who said Nicca Ray is film director Nicca Ray's daughter, and as her marvelous memoir unspools, she could be a genetically engineered female protagonist of an imaginary Nicca Ray picture, is what he said. And this is what someone else said: if you diagram Nicca Ray's family tree going back only 2 generations, it would resemble a web spun by a spider on acid. And that was said by our friend right here, Chris D. I wanted to get back to the family. We have to talk about Gloria Graham. We have to talk about Tony. That has to be in the conversation here. The thing that just blows me away is that Tony Ray was one of the stars of Shadows, one of the leads in Shadows.
Oh my God.
It's just incredible how, it all goes around and comes around. But there's much more inside information that I'd like to hear from you, Nicca, and maybe you have something to add, Chris.
I wasn't aware of that about Shadows. You're talking about John Cassavetes.
1959.
In Shadows. And
you look fabulous.
No, my hair.
I think you look fabulous. What do you say, Chris?
Okay, so here's the story about Shadows and Tony and Shadows. I was in film school. I was studying film at the New School with our mutual friend Donna, and I got the New York Times that morning, and they were doing a retrospective on Cassavetes films at Lincoln Center, and I open up the paper, and there's Tony, and he's in Shadows. I didn't know Tony was in Shadows, and I go to school. I'm like, Donna, Tony was in Shadows, and we just started busting up because, of course, that's my family. Duh. So, So my brother Tony, he's my half brother. he was my father's first son with his and his mom was Jean Evans, who was a writer and who wrote for PM magazine. Anyway, so Tony. So Tony was an actor before he became a producer, and he spent the summer in Malibu with my father Nick and Gloria when Nick and Gloria were married, and they lived in a little house right outside the Malibu colony. And their son Tim, my other half brother, was just an infant. And by the way, Tim lived in the guest house with his nanny. He didn't have a room in the main house. My father didn't like to have the children in the main house. My sister and I were kept in a whole separate wing of the house when we were babies. But anyway, so Tony, there was a situation with Tony and Gloria, and
How old was Tony?
What?
How old was Tony at that time?
He was 13 years old. He was a boy, a love-starved boy. And Gloria was Gloria Graham. I mean, you know, she was wow. And she seduced him. And anyway, so 8 years after my dad and Gloria divorced, Tony married Gloria. And anyway, so I write about it in the book. My father did all that he could to derail Tony's career, but Tony persevered, and he acted like in shadows. He acted on soap operas. He acted on Broadway. He was an understudy in the Dark at the Top of the Stairs, which Elia Kazan was directing. And anyway, so he married Gloria, and then they had two sons who were my nephews. You want to know? What else do you want to know?
What else besides the nephews were they? They had to be another connection too, right? Like they would be your just nephews. Or?
Oh, you want to hear all the different ways we'd be related if game?
Well, I guess I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
I write about it in the book. This is one of the reasons why you should buy this book, Ray by Ray.
There's also 50 photos from Nicca Ray's archive and Wim Wenders photos and a lot of great photos. 50, count them.
Leonard photos for those of you.
Leonard, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Tony's relationship with Gloria was sensationalized beyond repair, and you know, think what you want of it, but they loved each other. Growing up with having a half brother who married your father's second wife, and also my half brother had an affair with my mom, which led to the game How Many Different Ways We'd Be Related If, that my two nephews, Tony Jr. and Jimmy, and my sister Julie would play. We'd get stoned and play. You know, if our mom married your dad, you know, so that kind of like gave me you know, I didn't really grow up with adults who had appropriate boundaries. There you go.
That's a polite way to put it. Very
yes.
polite. But
Yes.
what a history, and right out of Hollywood, you couldn't have a better Hollywood legend than that one. And,
One thing, since we brought up your time at the New School, and when you and Donna were in New York, um, Donna told me, Donna, for people who don't know, is my ex-girlfriend, and she's actually how I met Nicca back in almost exactly 10 years ago to right now. And uh, she had told me stories that you and her also were waitressing together
Yep.
at a restaurant.
Lucky
And
dog.
and before he was famous, before he got the work, his film roles, and then he got Sopranos job, James Gandolfini lived upstairs from the restaurant where you guys.
Yep, he was a regular.
And you guys would occasionally chat with Mr. Gandolfini, and I know she was pretty upset when he passed away, and she told me, about a few stories about how you and her used to you and her used to have conversations about him when he was trying to make it, and his aspirations and kind of disappointments along the way before he struck it big, which I thought was very fascinating. Just the amount of and I know at the New School, you guys were both at the New School together,
Mhm.
and there was Albert Maysles who worked there, the documentary filmmaker, who did Salesman and Gimme Shelter and all that. So I'm wondering your life during that period in the '90s, and that was probably before maybe when this book was starting to kind of germinate. I don't know if you had started to work on it that early, but when you were going to the New School, and all that stuff was going on during that decade, do you have any memories of seeing your dad's movies during that period? And
Well, it was when I it was when I sort of came out of the closet as being my father's daughter. I remember I went to the New School for writing, and 2 years in, I started to take film, and I remember I was so nervous registering for production classes. I made Donna came with me and stood in line and helped me register. I was just so nervous, and I remember I was in cinematography. My cinematography teacher did roll call, and he was like, any relationship to Nicca Ray? And I was like, he's my father. And so it was in this really special school. Donna and I used to call it the weirdo school, and it was perfect. I was 33 when I went back to college. I had barely graduated high school, and um, it was just, I started to look at my dad's films. I went and saw Rebel Without a Cause for the first time. And little by little, by the end of my tenure there, my last semester, my second to last semester, I wrote this article for this now defunct magazine called Icon about my father for their legacy column. And it was right around that time I was walking through the hallways of the school, and I thought to myself, I am like so many people who have grown up not knowing their fathers and not knowing what parts of them come from their fathers. But unlike all these people, my father left behind a legacy, and I'm going to go find out. about my father.
Mhm.
And I went to my dean and I asked if I could start this as a independent study. And she sent me down to the director of the writing program, who at that time was Robert Polito. And I showed him my article. I told him what I wanted to do, thinking that he would recommend one of his staff, one of the writing staff, to work with me. And he said, I'll do it with you. So I ended up going to his office with all my journals. I've been keeping journals since I was 15, and the biography Bernard Eisenschitz did of my father called Nicca Ray, An American Journey. And I went into his office and I sprawled all this out, and I was like, where do I start? Yep, there you go.
Yeah,
And
I had it out in case I needed to look at the filmography. So.
yeah, so
I've got mine here.
I've got mine in the other room.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's how this book came about. So it was like by like 1999, like I graduated in 1999, and from then on, I was going back and forth to LA. I went, to the Warner Brother. I met with Leith Adams, who was the head of the Warner Brother archives. I met him at the Warner Brothers lot, and I remember that day I was staying with my friend Carla Bozilich in her house in Eagle Rock, and her boyfriend Nels. Carla wasn't feeling good that morning, so Nels drove me to the Warner Brothers lot, and I had never been on that lot, and I was like so freaking nervous, because a lot of I was just really nervous. I come from my past, my punk rock drinking past led me to panhandling and drinking Thunderbird wine and living in an apartment with a syringe painted on the bathroom door. So then, and I always carry that with me to a fault sometimes. But so Nels dropped me off at the Warner Brothers lot, and I was walking up to the security gate, and Frank Mazzola, who played, I think he played Crunch in Rebel Without a Cause, was driving into the lot with his wife Catherine, and he was there to meet Leith Adams too, because Leith Adams said, "Hey, Nicca's coming to meet me. Why don't you come and meet us for lunch?" And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship with Frank Mazzola.
Mhm.
What a great guy. What a great film editor. He became a film editor and edited.
I got to meet him when I was working at the American Cinematheque, and I did a Q&A with him for the movie because he was one of the editors on Performance.
Yes, he was
with
credited.
Donald Cammell and Nicholas Roeg, and he helped Donald Cammell really put that crazy quilt, especially at the beginning, the gangster stuff, together in Performance. But he had that other career as an actor when he was younger, and yeah, he was an amazing person. He came to the Cinematheque quite often when I was working there.
Yeah, he was real Hollywood royalty, in my opinion. Anyway, so that was the beginning, and I went to the Warner Brothers archives at USC, and I thought, when I walked into Robert Polito's office that day, I said, this will take me like about a year. I'll be done with this book in a year. I had no idea the weight of my father's legacy. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about him. So, I walked into the Warner Brothers archive at the USC Library, Cinema Studies, and they brought in 6 banker's boxes full of memos and stuff. And sitting in that room, they sit you in a room at these like desks, like school desks, and you're given index cards and a number 2 pencil. And you can't bring anything to this desk. and I felt like I was in my family's attic. Like, this must be what it feels to go into the attic and discover your grandparents' things and your parents' things they've never showed you. And there I am reading memos between my dad and Jack Warner. And it was like, whoa, you
Yeah.
know, oh. And from there just went on, it went on. It was just like, I attempted to write this on my own. It was too unwieldy. I got some help. I got backing. I got the help of a terrific journalist who came on interviews with me, and we left no stone unturned. And what, like almost 20 years later, I complete, a manuscript, and I wanted Three Rooms Press. I loved what you guys do. And like, I didn't go anywhere else. You're who I wanted. And you guys saw the story that I had to tell, and you gave my story as much weight as my father's story. I have lived under his shadow for all my life, and there were people along the way who I felt didn't really credit my story, because it was all about, like, what's going to sell. Nobody knows who you are. And well, here I am.
Well, in a way, you didn't know who you were until you found him, and thus you need to be in this book. It's your book,
Right.
simple formula. In fact, not probably less formulaic than a lot of the old Warner Brothers movies. But
Yeah. Yeah.
we were very happy to take on your project and bring it to be the best book it could be. And I guess we're kind of winding it down here, since Chris, you're wonderful. I want to invite you back on the 9th. You want to talk to both Nicca and Sam Fuller's daughter too?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that. We'll set that up. It'll be Saturday the 9th. It'll be a little early for you out there in LA because she's in France. So it's going to be about 11 o'clock. 11 a.m. You think you can handle that?
I can handle it.
You're all right.
Listen, especially my sleep patterns are, there's days where I start my day at 6 a.m. and there's other days where I'm not going to bed till 6 a.m. And since this whole wonderful pandemic thing has been happening, it's even more pronounced as far as the haphazard, when my day is going to start, and how, there's times at night where I get inspired to write or to watch film, and I look up and suddenly the sun is shining through the window. So I suppose I'm lucky to be in a place right now of where I've got enough to sustain me until all this craziness is over. But yeah, I'd love to do it. And I've met Samantha before. I don't know if she remembers me. I know her mom a little better.
Krista, is that her mom, Krista, or is her mom?
Krista, yeah.
Yeah.
Krista was somebody who was at the Cinematheque for a lot of screenings, and she I had done an interview with my girlfriend at the time, Judith, one of the last issues of Slash magazine. And I was actually the editor on the last couple issues. For people who don't know, Slash magazine was kind of a punk rock tabloid that had interviews and record reviews, and was in business from about early 1977 till December 1980, I think. But their last big issue, they had tons of interviews with all kinds of different people, including film directors. And Judith and I went up to Sam Fuller's house and interviewed him.
Wow.
The big red one was just about ready to come out, and we got to interview him.
1981 or so, huh?
Pardon me?
About 1981.
It was 1980, and he had his famous garage, which if you see that documentary with Tarantino and Tim Robbins and Jim Jarmusch, the typewriter, the rifle, and whatever it is. They're in that garage where Sam was. It was his office, and he had all this World War II memorabilia and film memorabilia all over the place. And yeah, Krista was a fixture at the Cinematheque, and I met Sam then, and then when I started to be associated with the Cinematheque in the late '90s, one of his last retrospectives he did was at the Cinematheque before they moved to the Egyptian Theater, and we had him as a guest there. That was actually before I was on the payroll there at the Cinematheque. But you know, and as it turns out, my ex-wife Julie and quite a few other people I know independently of the movie scene are friends with Krista and have known her for quite a while. So
well, it'll be a lot of fun then to have. Yeah. I'll figure out the way we'll set it up and do it, but you probably can come on a little later, so it won't be that early for you, but it'll be within that hour. So, but it sounds like a great thing, and you've been so wonderful to have with us tonight. I know that Nicca's been, you know, just shining because of being with you, and we thank you so much. So I'm gonna talk to Nicca for a second, and I want you to say bye to Chris D, and we'll talk to you in a few minutes, okay? Because we'll be done. So just
okay. And I just want to say that Nicca's book is a great read. You'll zip through it like it's only a few pages. It's such a can't put down book, and I love the stream of consciousness that you employ, and you know, it's I connected all the dots. I don't know if, you know, maybe it'll be you know, some people might desire a more conventional narrative, but I loved it for being kind of it's a kind of book I think your dad would have enjoyed reading. You know,
I mean, that's right. We have the Ray family in here. How could we be conventional?
Yeah.
So we'll see you soon, Chris. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.
You're welcome. Hang loose for a minute.
For everything. Nicca, hello.
I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk Mom at all. We didn't get a chance to talk Betty, but when we do the 9th, we'll talk Betty some before we bring anybody else on.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of let Samantha read her intro, and then you two guys can discuss what you feel, and then we'll bring Chris between you. It'll be a great show also.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It's a great show, right? Did you have fun tonight?
I had so much fun tonight. It was so great. I like it. I've been waiting for this night for so long. to celebrate. Like, let's celebrate. Like, you know, if we were all live, I'd be like, let's start dancing. Let's you know, but you know, maybe when this is all over and we're all free to congregate, you know, without getting each other sick, we can have a big party. And I just like, it's my, yeah.
It's like a big party right now, just having you on the screen next to me. I'm gonna make one more pass at the good old book, Ray by Ray, A Daughter's Take on the Legend of Nicholas Ray. You can still get it. In fact, 3 hours from now, you can go to this link and still get it, and tomorrow at that time. So by Nicca Ray, who's right here with me. And we're going to be signing off now. But thank you so much for joining us out there in virtual land as we lock down, but loosen up our minds and start thinking about a lot more than what they'd like us to.
Thank you for everyone for coming.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.